Portland City Council recently voted to label more than 1,000 buildings in the city as potentially unsafe during an earthquake.
And now a group of building owners is threatening to sue the city because of it. Fox 12's Haley Rush has more.
The ordinance requires old brick buildings known as unreinforced masonry buildings to have an 8 by 10-inch plaque by the front entrance that states it may be unsafe in the event of a major earthquake. That includes schools, churches, and apartment buildings, to name a few. But a letter recently sent to the city by a Portland attorney calls the ordinance unconstitutional. They're everywhere you look in Portland. Unreinforced masonry buildings, or URMs.
This is the landmark.
Brad Popik's shop, the Portland Outdoor Store, is an example of one of the more than 1,600 URMs in the city.
The store's been here 100 years. It'll be 100 years next year.
It's also a shop that will soon have an 8 by 10-inch plaque by the front entrance, telling customers the building may be unsafe in the event of a major earthquake.
There's some real issues with that.
If you ask Popik, the ordinance puts a scarlet letter on his longtime business, even though he says his landlord is looking into ways to retrofit the building.
Labeling that is, I think, is a stretch. I think it's a little far.
Partner John DeLorenzo at the Portland law firm Davis Wright Tremaine agrees, calling the ordinance unconstitutional.
Most of these bridges would fall into the river. If there were a 9.0 earthquake, they're not going to be placarded.
Last week, he sent a letter to the mayor threatening a lawsuit on behalf of the masonry building owners of Oregon if the city doesn't withdraw the ordinance or work with the group to change it. His claim, the ordinance is against free speech.
Because we as owners are being required to speak the way the city wants us to speak.
DeLorenzo also claims the timeline for putting up the placards is unfair and politically influenced. The city tells us publicly owned buildings are required to have placards up by January 2019. By March, all privately owned buildings should have them. And then in 2020, nonprofits like churches are required to put them up.
If you own the identical building and happen to be a for-profit entity, you have to place a large placard at the entryway of your building containing the city's statements by March 1st of next year. If you own the very same building, but you happen to be a nonprofit, you have 2 years to do it. And if you happen to have that building as your house and use it as a residence, you don't have to placard at all.
To put up a sign that says it's dangerous it's hard for people, even when it's true.
Jana Paba-Ethemy is the Planning, Policy, and Community Programs Manager for the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management.
I think as citywide we had greater awareness of earthquake risk.
She says for years now, the city has looked at ways to help make Portland's most vulnerable buildings safer.
And when they got to council, the feeling was that we just weren't quite there yet in terms of implementing a mandatory retrofit requirement for the majority of commercial unreinforced masonry buildings.
So as a compromise, she says they decided to at least let people know about the potential risks in the most direct way possible.
The state of California has required these plaques since the 1990s, and it's helped people be more informed.
Portland City Commissioner Dan Saltzman backs the ordinance.
To my mind, this was, okay, if we're not going to do something sooner, we should at least give people information that we have. If we have it, people have a right to have it.
The commissioner says he doesn't believe the plaques will keep people from visiting their favorite restaurants and stores. However,
it may influence a decision about whether they lease an apartment or an office. But I think you can't blame people for acting in their own best interests.
He also admits the placards are only a temporary step to hopefully a permanent solution.
When those types of decisions are made by residents, that helps light a fire under the landlords to make those seismic retrofits.
Commissioner Saltzman says he's met with city attorneys and on a preliminary basis can tell me they don't think the ordinance is unconstitutional and they feel they can defend the claims. He says as far as he knows, the city is planning to respond to the letter Friday. DeLorenzo, of course, says if they don't withdraw the ordinance, he is prepared to file a suit. Reporting in studio, Haley Rush, Fox 12 Oregon.